Um, Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the second day of our conference, and I'm sure many of you who attended yesterday's proceedings have found it worth your while to be with us. I'm Maruf Raza, and I'll be giving you both an overview of some of India's security concerns and the threats and our responses to it up to now. But more importantly, for those of you who are here from a business perspective, what are the opportunities, what moves have taken place up to now, what initiatives have come into play with regard to equipment purchases. So I'll get on with first explaining, that's India, for those of you not too familiar with the map. As you can see that India is divided into a number of states. We have, as far as I can remember, 29 states and 5 union territories. So totally about 33 independent governments, many of them larger than many countries in the world. So clearly New Delhi, in the case of internal security, not just has to contend with challenges from across the border and lots of problems within, but also trying to marry and keep the relationship with all the states on an even keel. Of course, traditionally governments in India, in Delhi, have been blamed by some of the states who are run by opposition parties for not really being on the same playing field with them. And there is the human element, there are biases, and therefore opportunities sometimes do not get addressed immediately, and sometimes issues take long, like the Maoist problem that we have, or the Director General of Police yesterday brought out the northeastern issue. They've been dragging on for years and years. So just to give you an idea of the problems that we have in India, in terms of internal security, but let me just give you a quick background on external security. We have Pakistan on our west, and many of you know strained relations with Pakistan. But since the time of General Zia, Pakistan adopted a strategy of bleeding India by 1,000 cuts. And Kashmir is quite clearly the playground for those activities. And whatever the denials, there is enough evidence available, not just in India, but through international study groups and documented evidence of Pakistan continuing to keep terror groups functional, and their infrastructure hasn't been dismantled. In fact, the Pakistan Army Chief is on record to say that they are strategic assets. And therefore, Pakistan doesn't really have to contend with the terror problem on its eastern borders with India, but more with the western groups where tribal factions have now been labeled as the Taliban menace. But there is a whole history to that. Other than that, we have the conventional threat from China, and none of us can overrule that. We also have a long coastal border. Maritime security, therefore, has become of paramount importance since particularly the 26/11 attacks on Mumbai, and as was brought out yesterday, that it was also a possible target for Pakistan terror groups. Pakistan may call them non-state actors, but clearly they were supported and trained there. To attack some of the refineries in Gujarat, which is given in green out there under the word PA. So thereafter, other areas of coastal security have also become a focus area. But two major problems that we have other than Kashmir, Kashmir is quite classically the new battlefield. It's been the problem has been there for us since independence, but since 1989-90, very clearly cross-border terrorism has been a phenomena in the security of Kashmir. Yesterday, I saw a news item that prior to the Prime Minister's visit to Jammu and Kashmir, there was an ambush on a convoy in J&K which left 4 soldiers dead. So that's a regular factor, and ambushes for army convoys and involving soldiers' deaths are lesser now because the army is much better prepared and trained to deal with those issues. Unlike, as has been brought out in the Maoist insurgency, which really that broad red block which is given under the word Nepal, And it really goes a little further down. And as I brought out yesterday, from Pashupati to Tirupati, Pashupati is the famous temple in Kathmandu. Tirupati is further south in India, another prominent temple. So the red line of insurgencies runs right through. And then you have multiple secessionist movements in India's northeast. Why you need to understand all this is, any business venture into India, you must factor in, firstly, the federal nature of India's government. So thereby, you're not just dealing with Delhi, where central police forces and armed forces operate and headquartered are, but you're also dealing with state governments. In the case of the Maoist issue, you're dealing with multiple state governments. Many of them are still having different approaches to how to deal with the problem. Political agendas is one issue, but the other factor is also that there is a desire on the part of the police forces to continue to guard their own turfs of influence, and political parties do tend to humor some Maoist groups for as vote banks. But you have the multiple secessionist movements in India's northeast. Insurgency began there in 1954, but in various states thereafter mushroomed in various forms. Okay, this is the same. Okay. Indian law enforcement agencies, there are multiple law enforcement agencies, there are multiple armed police groups, police outfits, and there are also regular police units. So you have law and order is a state subject in India, which means that all those states in different colors that you saw on the Indian map, by and large, have their own authority to maintain law and order and battle with threats like insurgency as, by and large, they deem fit. The Union Home Ministry performs the function of advisory and assistance to police forces. Union Home Ministry has a number of central police forces for both for border guarding, for internal security, armed police, and a lot of them are provided for the protection of Delhi, the parliament, and various other institutions in Delhi. The estimate strength of India's central armed police forces is about 780,000, which is, just to put it in perspective, is about 8 times larger than the British Army. The total strength of state police forces is 2 million. So we've got, give or take a little, about 3 million people, non-armed forces, but many of them armed and trained and operate like the armed forces in uniform. India's central armed police forces, all of them are listed there, and the numbers are there for you to see. Largest of them is the CRPF, Central Reserve Police Force, which is an army like itself, 300,000. And then the Border Security Force, which guards the border areas, in addition to the ITBP and Sashastra Sena Bal SSB. So there are various paramilitary forces which are the frontline people on India's borders, though not as well equipped as the Indian Army, but short of an infantry battalion, they have a fair amount of training and equipment. Other key agencies are the National Investigative Agency, the National Security Guard, the National Intelligence Grid, and the National Counter-Terror Center. NCTC is still being debated, really, which form it should be implemented, and there have been reservations expressed by opposition parties and states that this is another ploy by the Delhi government to take control of everything. So I think till we get it sorted out, it'll take a while, but about $1 billion has been spent on the modernization of the central police forces. More is scheduled to be spent. A selective list of the major weapon systems bought by the central police forces. This gives you a whole idea of the weapon systems, from jackets to assault rifles, to grenade launchers, to PNS weapons, to armored troop carriers. Even helicopters have been bought. As you can see, 8 have been bought. And all of them are now being gradually put into use as and when the troops get familiar and their distribution is sorted out from between Delhi and the state concerned. More items are on the wish list and are due to be bought soon. So, but this gives you an idea of the kind of market that you should be looking at in India if you wish to sell any technology and weapon systems. Modernization of state police forces. The state police forces generally Modernization is supported and sponsored by New Delhi, which is there's a national budget, there is a state level budget. So, they find a healthy mix between the two to try and pay for all the items that are required. There are weaponry, communication systems, training items, forensic lab items, equipment, building, etc. It was given out in great detail in yesterday evening's presentations by the senior police officers, but this is just to recap some of the issues with regard to modernization of police forces and where your market opportunities lie. Now, this is a new concept that has come into place in India. Some of the bigger cities, and as I was reading a future report last night, put together by the National Intelligence Agency of the US, and they predict that, and even I think Jonathan Price referred to it yesterday, that out of the 10 mega cities in the world projected over the next 10 years or more, there would be about 5 Indian cities in those mega cities, and in the top 5 mega cities in terms of sheer number and size, there would be 2 to 3 Indian cities. So mega city policing has become the big thing, particularly in the aftermath of the 26/11 attacks on India, which in many ways, as many of my Indian friends and colleagues will agree, was a watershed in the thinking in the Indian security agencies that yes, this is really the next target area. Until then, a lot of our problems were outside really the cities. Those cities had been receiving smaller terror attacks. There were bomb blasts. There were various problems that cities had to contend with. But the scale and the orchestration of the attack on Mumbai really got everybody to sit up and rethink that yes, there was something that we had missed out on reading the writing on the wall. What all megacity policing activities and items which would be on the menu card, as it were. There would be night vision devices, there would be GPS systems, patrol cars, surveillance cameras, CCTV systems, security equipment at various buildings, from X-ray machines to scanners, and various other technologies which many of you in London would obviously be very familiar with. Modernization of Mumbai police. Now let's take the example of Mumbai police. What all has happened? What's on the cards? Since the 26/11 attacks, an estimated 500 crores, that is about 10 million US dollars, 100 million, sorry, has been spent on the modernization of Mumbai police. And the norm is 75% of the cost is borne by the central government in New Delhi, and the state government bears the other. But there is a constant issue that comes up, as far as I understand, that central government officials have sometimes, politely confided in me to say that the problem is the money is there, but we don't get enough statements of cases, we don't get projections from the state police in time, so the budgetary allocations can't really be used up. States have become, Mumbai is, by the way, part of the state of Maharashtra, those of you who don't know. So it's a mega city on its own, but it still is controlled by the government of Maharashtra. Unlike New Delhi, which is the national capital and a state, and so it has its own government and it has the Indian government also there in place. So to understand India, I keep repeating this, ladies and gentlemen, it's a very complex country, and our diversity, our size, our ethnicity, our population, our cities, the number of people, and that's really the big issue, is how to protect large numbers of people in crowded places. Many of them are just not given to accepting checks and security measures still with that urgency as they are in a city like London. Bombay has raised its own equivalent of a rapid kind of commando force called Force One. Plans are afoot for installation of 5,000 CCTVs. Many of them have been ordered, but I think we still have to go a long way in the CCTV game to have command control centers, to have monitoring centers, to take the whole process of CCTV. Just an example, recently there were cycle bomb blasts in the city of Pune, which is the second city of the state of Maharashtra, just about 2 hours drive from Bombay. And there were some 270 CCTVs that were installed, and as far as I understand, about 86 were operational, and even those were not manned. So where the bomb blast took place, CCTVs were there, but nobody really was up to speed in handling the problem. Modernization of Mumbai police, a list of equipment that has been ordered, and more such equipment of this nature will be ordered. This includes a lot of training of Mumbai Police. By the way, it might interest some of you. Our sister organization, Indian Eye Security, and Brigadier Kaul was here. There he is. He is responsible for training Mumbai Police. They're training in our training academy in a town called Belgaum. Then adjacent to Belgaum, a small village called Belgundi, and we have training academy there. So I think give or take, 10,000 policemen are to be trained eventually, but batches of 100, 150 are being trained. Delhi police modernization, again, a slightly separate set of equipment. The big difference between Delhi and Mumbai is a coastal city. Delhi doesn't really have waterfronts of the size of Mumbai. So the approach is slightly different. Delhi is much more sensitive to the VIP culture. In India, there's a huge VIP culture. So everybody is somebody because somebody is connected to somebody. So therefore, a lot of people have to be protected other than the common man and the population. But this gives you an idea of a policeman standing in a public place, in a market. I think this is a festival season, so all the ladies are dressed up. Central Armed Police modernization. Now, this is a slightly separate game than mega city policing. Mega city policing, Mumbai has its own police, Delhi has its own police, but Delhi also has the Central Armed Police Forces. And as I listed out earlier, if you remember the second slide, there's the CRPF, there's the BSF, there is the ITBP, and there is the NSG. The NSG, yesterday Brigadier Kaul threw a bit of light about NSG's training, its ethos, and NSG is, they're all Central Armed Police Forces, and they are approaching different objectives. There is the sniffer dog requirement for, as in the army, they used to call it the Indian Patrol Dog, IP. There are more funds being made available for that. There are also reports of about 300 billion being allocated for sophisticated weapons, upgrade the handheld weapons and various other stuff that the armed police forces require. Phase 1 of modernization would include all this. Much of this is already in the pipeline, but there are opportunities here. There is, apart from modernization in terms of arms and weapon system, there is also solar energy being proposed as part of the modernization drive. Coastal security, this is the second issue. Now, the coastal security goes beyond Mumbai. Mumbai is a big city on the coast, but there are other major cities of India which are coastline cities. Chennai, Madras is one of them. Thiruvananthapuram, Trivandrum, there is Cochin, there is Goa, I mean, which is pretty much India's, the Riviera, as it were. And there's Vishakhapatnam, which is a big naval base, and there is Calcutta is very close to the coast, you know, but not really a coastal city. So there are coastal cities that are threatened from all sorts of threats, which could range from just odd terrorist groups floating across. Recently, I was interacting with a Coast Guard's official, and they said that, you know, they discovered pirates just 200 nautical miles outside India's coast. Which is a long way off if you were to look at the world map from Somalia, Ethiopia, and right across the Arabian Sea to come so close. So there is the issue of coastal security, which is important. The Coast Guard is expected to have 300 ships and 100 aircrafts. Not all of them have been bought. But I do understand that what is being bought by the coastal police in Mumbai in terms of coastal patrol boats, etc., many of them still are not fully in service because of the absence of trained staff to man them. So there is a training opportunity there. For better coastal security and surveillance, you know, various new outfits have been created. There is a maritime command, and there is a very close interaction between now the Navy, the Coast Guards, the coastal police, and all the elements that will make the coastal area safe and secure. There is also aviation reconnaissance aircrafts like Poseidon, which have been brought, and we've recently just picked up more AVACs from the United States. As many of you know, they have some capability known as SLAR, which is sideways looking airborne radars. So you can actually be in your own coastal area, but look pretty much 250 to 300 kilometers on either side. The government is also setting up a chain of radars. Now, this is other than airborne radar systems, radars there. Might interest some of you that recently we had also ventured into offering radars and monitoring systems to the Maldivian government. So our Navy, our communication people, they are pretty much up to speed with this whole business of monitoring, and perhaps the job is a little easier considering the fact that they're not dealing with the volumes of people that are in India's cities and mainland. Okay, now the Maoist menace. Yesterday, Mr. Pandey had gone into great detail about the Maoist menace, so I'm not going to go over it all over again, except the fact that, yes, as you can see, there are lots of problem areas right across. At one stage, they said about India has, if I know correctly, I think over 550 odd districts, and of which about 210, 215 were affected by the Maoist problem. But I think that was an exaggeration. The realistic figure is about 33 to 35 districts, which are really, a district is like a city county here. So all the districts that are really affected by Maoists, they are not in one cluster. They are spread better part of India's heartland. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has been on record to say that it's India's gravest threat. He made that statement at least thrice to my knowledge there on the internet. But I don't think we've really addressed it as yet as India's gravest threat, because there is a debate between to what extent the city police and the state police will be addressing the problem, to what extent the armed police and the CRPF will be handling the problem, and if at all to get the armed forces in. The armed forces have a lot of experience of dealing with insurgencies in India's northeast. They've dealt with it from 1954. In Kashmir, they're battling that, but there is a reluctance, I'm told, on the part of the army's higher command to get involved there. So the rules of the game are still being defined, and therefore the problem will persist for quite a while. I said some of this. State-level special police forces for anti-Maoist operations, these are different outfits. So this is a little different than special forces, as Brigadier Kaul qualified and clarified yesterday in his presentation. Special forces have a special role. They're not necessarily very large in number, they shouldn't be, but they should be operating in consonance with regular bodies of troops. And therefore, these special units are state units which are being used to deal with the Maoist insurgency in various parts of India. Just to give you an idea, so the point I'm trying to make is, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, if you were to try and do business in India, you have to deal with multiple levels of agencies, multiple things. So it's good and bad. Bad because you get completely confused who to be talking to. And good because there are multiple opportunities. Modernization of anti-Maoist forces. More battalions are being raised. Home Ministry is setting up 21 counterinsurgency, anti-terrorist training schools across India. Some of them already in place. Many more will be set up. So really, there is a huge modernization drive, and I don't see it ending for the next decade. And expertise of all sorts will be required there, from training to technology. Estimated expenditure for the whole project is, we're looking at $150 million. By the way, the cost of setting up institutions and all in India is much lesser than you would look at here in Western countries for obvious reasons. India's homeland security market and the market potential. Now, these are the broad areas that you should be looking at. A, internal security market, riot control equipment market, non-lethal weapons market, critical infrastructure security market, aviation security, maritime security, and border security. They're all separate pieces of the jigsaw. And you will do well for yourself to try and understand that. By the way, just to give you an idea, there is a magazine that's available freely downstairs. We put it together for this event. It gives a fairly good understanding from an overview of the various challenges that are in India and how they're being addressed, what are the opportunities. India, as you all would know, ladies and gentlemen, is now perhaps the world's largest arms importer. And the way things are being spread out over the next few years, one set of estimates says that over the next 5 years, India would be looking at importing something like $80 billion worth of equipment, and in the next 15 years, the economist says 200 billion. So there is a market, probably the biggest in the world. The broad areas where the market exists are in these areas. Perimeter security market, largely in areas like, I mean, we've fenced the whole border with Pakistan by and large, but the fencing continues to come under huge strain, not just by jihadist groups from Pakistan wanting to penetrate and get into the valley once again, Kashmir Valley, but also because of weather constraints. Those of us who are familiar with Jammu and Kashmir would know that the severe winter leaves this massive fencing, which in some areas is half as broad as this room. And it has various levels of fencing, but after the winter, it's completely crumpled. And so you go back to putting it together. So there is the perimeter fencing issue. There is biometric identification, private security market. This is a huge market, ladies and gentlemen. I haven't even touched on it because as officials from the government would be happy to educate us, it's an area which is still fairly unregulated. And the government is still exploring various opportunities to what extent the private security market should be regulated. Should they be allowed to carry weapons for their own protection? In some places, ex-servicemen are allowed to carry weapons, but they're not necessarily AK-47s or the equivalent. They're often carrying a pistol on themselves or a 12-bore rifle or something, and therefore, they are not really organized, and they don't have the training, they don't have the command control systems, and there are various other security issues. So I think that debate is still on, the jury is out on it, to what extent you can get it. But there is the aerial reconnaissance market, which is again a good market to be looking at. There is also the business of providing helicopter services, not just for transporting VIPs, but also for aerial reconnaissance in areas where troop movement is very difficult, such as the jungle insurgencies. There, any elevated space will give you a much, much longer view on what kind of terrain your patrols are up against. And there is a special weapons and training market for special forces, weapon systems to simulators. There was talk yesterday also about simulators and equipment and how that can be used. So there is the opportunity there, and some companies have got in, and it's not just the army, the police is looking at it very seriously also, and the paramilitary forces. Right, so just before I wind up, just 3 or 4 points. One is that the Kashmir insurgency will be around for long, for a variety of reasons. I mean, I can give you a separate talk on it, but just to tell you that the opportunities there are there, but however limited, because the forces operating there have by and large got their act together in terms of training, equipment, etc. But there is the Maoist issue, which will also go on, to my understanding, even if the government puts together number of proactive steps, it's going to go on for at least 7 to 10 years, which is normally the cycle of most insurgencies in the world. It is still a guerrilla conflict area, and my understanding guerrillas cannot be limited to numbers of 10 and 12. A force that operates with hit-and-run operations, whatever the size, would qualify as a guerrilla force, which is, in a way, an irregular force operating against government forces. So that is the nature of the counterinsurgency operations there. It's heavy jungle terrain, as was brought out yesterday. But there are a lot of individuals and civilians who are caught up in the crossfire, and there are issues about where force should be implemented and up to what point, and where good governance should come into play and when, and finally, what kind of dialogue you should have with them and under what constraints. Clearly, it has to be within the limits of the Indian Constitution. The other areas of threat to India are the refineries, the many oil refineries, energy installations, public gatherings places, huge. Railway stations in particular it'll freak you out if you've never been to India, the kind of size and volume of people that just move around out there. And to try and get your act together in that is a challenge by itself. There are local terrorist groups now that have been trained as part of the so-called Karachi project initiated in Pakistan in 2002. There are many of them come under the banner of something called Indian Mujahideen. Of late, evidence has begun to surface about them carrying out terror acts, whether in the city of Pune or Hyderabad or in Bangalore. So they are trying to target sensitive areas, computer installations, IT parks, and these are things that make news. As many of you know, if you didn't have the media, the terrorists would have created the media because they want media coverage. And the best way to get media coverage is to create bad news in abundance. And finally, India has many, many more challenges ahead, primarily because there is a lack of political will at various levels to address the problem. Where the politicians have given the police a free hand, given them a defined mandate, they've been able to achieve it. But where politicians interfere, and many of them do not lack the strategic understanding, and it takes a while to get to grips with it. And therefore, in the absence of that, political concerns often override internal